Hello and welcome all to the Horror Cinema Podcast of the Halloween Nightmare Corner of Horror. Yeah, we're going to need an abbreviated name or something. But this is going to be the first episode of a new Horror Cinema Podcast, or at least a second season. And this year, we decided that for the movies, we're going to watch the Hammer Dracula movies and read Frankenstein, doing the reverse of what we did last year, or at least in our previous set of podcasts and videos. So here we go. Hope you all enjoy it. Now, we start with the horror of Dracula, which I've got a bit of a mixed relationship with this movie. Now, I do appreciate a lot of things about it, and I have been accused of being a hater and of not genuinely liking it and not being a true fan because I feel frustrated that it's not closer to the novel, and I feel angry about the portrayal of Mina, which is a terrible one. But the more people have accused me of being a hater and not a true fan has actually made me kind of dislike the movie more and feel kind of annoyed towards those who say you're a hater and you don't deserve this movie or whatever. But it's just, the novel is one in my top 10 favorite novels of all times. It's one of the greatest novels ever written, as far as I'm concerned. And from the word go, this movie starts with Jonathan Harker, but then deconstructs and destroys the character. Now, it just sabotages him. Because in the novel, Jonathan Harker is there to work as essentially a real estate agent, selling property and helping Dracula with the paperwork. But then he's captured and has to struggle to get out and get back to Mina. It's a very awesome, incredible story. In the movie, he's there hunting Dracula. As noted by AVGN, who did a great set of podcasts on this movie series. And he's right, there's nothing like this Dracula film series. But Harker is instead paired with Lucy, as he noted, which is such a weird pairing. And Mina is instead 25 years possibly older than what she is in the book. Rather than being some 22 or 25-year-old, she's instead at least about 50 years old, which is so weird. And, Arthur, instead of being some 30-year-old, is now probably a 55 or 60-year-old. That is so weird. He looks like he's 50. Or between 45 and 55. And what's more is that they paired Mina with Arthur, but make her someone who's willing to hide Dracula for some reason. Probably due to hypnotism. But the trouble in the book is that Mina is the most anti-Dracula character. After, of course, Van Helsing and maybe Jonathan. She really she wants him gone because she fears Dracula and fears for her own soul, immortal soul. But in this movie, she desires Dracula on a certain level, on a lizard level, I guess you could say, because we're not allowed to use the S word on YouTube, I think. But it is so weird, and that decision by Terry Fisher is so terrible. It is one of the worst directorial decisions I've ever seen. Now, the thing with the Dracula movies is they actually get better from this, because this is a low point to an extent. Now, there are high points in the horror of Dracula. The set design is perfect. The music and the feel in almost every scene is perfect. The casting choices, for the most part, are perfect. Jonathan, Mina, Arthur notwithstanding. Van Helsing, weirdly, I actually think Peter Cushing, if you wanted the perfect casting for the novel, Peter Cushing would be perfect as Jonathan Harker. When I read Dracula, I imagine Jonathan Harker being Peter Cushing. But Peter is perfectly cast as Van Helsing, and he truly wants to catch his darn vampire. And every scene he steals, like, the dude is charisma personified. He is perfect. But the plot comes down to basically Dracula deciding to go to England to claim Lucy because his bride was slain by Jonathan. Slain, well, loosely speaking there. But then while there he decides, he'll get Mina as well, which, okay. But the problem I have is just, no, that's not how it's supposed to work. And Mina being party to, well, just choosing Dracula to an extent, and having enjoyed losing her blood, at no point in the novel do they enjoy losing their blood to Dracula. I don't know where that idea came from. The movie is just so bizarre there. So that I get why Christopher Lee found this one of the more frustrating movies he ever produced. And why he complained, just use Bram Stoker's words. Why won't you use his words? Why won't you use his plot? Why can't we adapt the novel? And he begged and pleaded and complained to not only Fisher but the Hammerhead executives, but they didn't want to adapt the novel. Now, to the lovers of this movie, a lot of you are probably going to hate me, but I don't really care at this point. I'm tired of being hated by some of the fans of this movie. Now, that doesn't mean I hate the movie. I actually kind of like it. It's just I have to ignore the Mina scenes and pretend they don't happen and that this is not Mina but some other woman. Arthur Holmwood, I have to imagine that it's his dad or something. I don't know. Like his dad that dies in the novel. Lucy, I have no idea what to think of her. The actress actually nails one of the most important scenes, like when Lucy's preying upon, or the undead vampire that is haunting Lucy's flesh, I guess you could say, craves, and kidnaps a child. It's creepy. I fear for the child. That scene is perfectly shot, perfectly acted. Like, it's such a perfect scene. Honestly, no other Dracula movie has ever managed to nail that scene or the terror contained within the White Lady parts of the novel, which those are some of the creepiest novel scenes because Lucy is such a loving person, and now her vampire is hunting children and trying to devour the blood from these children. Bram Stoker writes it in a very haunting, terrifying way. No movie has nailed it quite like this one. So this movie gets some things very right. The decor of Dracula's castle is perfect. My complaint about every non-Hammer movie, and especially every non-Terry Fisher movie, is that why couldn't they get the decor right? What's more is Christopher Lee might just be my favorite Dracula because Bela Lugosi is really good. No, he's even freaking great. But there's just something... When Lee puts his mind to doing the role really well, like, you can tell when he's not happy. When he actually decides to speak, the thing is, they had a hard time getting him to say the lines because their lines were at times not the best.
And sometimes he spoke very fast.
In this movie, yes, but not in the later ones. But he nails those lines, but you have to understand, he was not happy with this not being a direct novel adaptation. And we know that a lot of the lines Hammer wanted him to speak, he said were terrible, and he's like, I'm not saying those lines. So when they'd say, all right, you have to speak up in the scene, he would say nothing. And that is telling to an extent. And the thing with Lee is he nails the role every chance he gets, But the trouble is that if only they had taken his advice for most of the movies. And most of the Hammer movies are actually great films. This one, I find, is one of the more mediocre ones. But it's still a good movie. Peter Cushing is perfect. I mean, when they talk about how the blood sucking is a bit like that a vampire does, it's a bit like a drug, and that no vampire can resist their instincts, that's, yeah. Or and that it's a form of possession. And that it's a satanic cult. It's like, yeah. And it's just, it's so perfect in those scenes. Although that said, I did complain about the miscasting of the Arthur Holmwood actor, he's actually a good actor.
He tried his best to.
He nails the role. Like, it's just he's too old for the role. Actually, he would have been my first choice at Van Helsing. Maybe they should have cast him as Van Helsing and Peter Cushing as Jonathan Harker. And bring in an American to play Quincy.
I agree.
Why don't they ever bring anyone in to play Quincy? Quincy's one of the best characters in the novel. He's like the personification of a Texan. Heck, in the modern age, I'd say if you were to cast someone from the 90s, Brendan Fraser would have been my first choice as Quincy. And Quincy is such a heroic, great character. I love him. He's one of my top, probably like my fourth favorite character after probably Mina, Jonathan, Van Helsing, in that order. Then you have Quincy. I love Quincy, but he's never brought into any of the movies. He never appears. Yeah, he's the only American character, but he's such a perfect character.
The stuff in this movie that drags it down is, as mentioned,
bad.
The artistic liberties.
But the good stuff, some of the stuff they nail from the novel, they nail more than any other movie ever has. Some of the stuff they nail from, like, that is their own stuff, but is good, they do nail. So, yeah, this is an overall good movie. It just has these mixed moments. So, let's rate this movie. How would you rate it from 0 to 4?
I'll rate it a 2.
Yeah, I'll rate it a 2 as well.
It's a good movie. If you want to start with the Hammer horror flicks, this is a good start.
Because the thing is, well, some might say the Hammer movie, Frankenstein movie, is a better place to start. I disagree, because that movie is a complex film. You know, like with the different point of views, the different narrations, so to speak, and the fact that you have Elizabeth Frankenstein, who betrays Victor at the end, which brings up a lot of questions about the narration and the narrative, and where the possibility that her and Paul sabotaged Victor. Then you got Victor mentioning in the second movie that he will have his revenge. Then mentions that he did have his revenge at one point, which suggests he killed the two. The thing about the first two Frankenstein movies is they are a lot more complex films in some ways than this movie. This movie is very simple in a lot of ways, and that's its strength. That's a good thing.
It's far more loyal to the book.
No, it's not.
Than the Frankenstein Hammer movie.
I'd say no. I'm going to disagree with you very strongly and say no. Neither. They're equally disloyal to the novels. But the difference is one is told. There's no more. It doesn't get more complex than the first two Frankenstein movies. As far as filmmaking goes, the way they're shot and they're scripted and they're made, it's very complex stuff right there. The way the narrative is woven with the Paul, Elizabeth, Victor angle, it brings in a lot of questions. But there's also the fact that we also get the story according to Victor. What's the story according to Paul and Elizabeth? Where do they stand in all this? There's a lot of details that are just complex and woven in a complicated way. Dracula is just straightforward. It's a straightforward narrative in this film. So it's better to start with Dracula, Horror of Dracula, because it's a very simplistic movie. The narrative is not told in any complicated way. It's just told simplistically. Whereas Frankenstein, there's a conscious decision to make it more complicated than what the Dracula movie is. So that's where I'm going to make that distinction. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, as we do want to grow this channel, and we want to do a lot more horror content in the future. So don't forget to stay tuned for our next Horror Cinema podcast video, which will be the second Dracula movie from Hammer, which is a great movie.